Hello and welcome to Marketing Global Edition with me, Jasmine Montgomery.
And me, Piers Geiler. So, Jasmine, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, there has been a fascinating story this week, which I think we've all been talking about because it's been billed as this huge branding story. And in a sense, I think that is a misnomer. But since everyone has said it's a branding story, we're going to talk about it as if it's a branding story because it's really interesting. And that is the story of Allbirds. So,
Fair dues. Okay.
yeah, so Allbirds, right? Which was like has been the maker of these kind of wool trainers that have been considered super cool by the sort of tech bros of Silicon Valley, were worn by kind of Barack Obama
Armour,
and
yeah.
other great dudes. I mean, Obama, who's one of the great loves of my life, as you know, he wore them, and they've made shoes, right, all their life.
They're super,
All of
super comfortable looking, aren't they? And they're made out of wool and something. It's all about being recyclable, right? They were one of the first recyclable shoes, weren't they?
Right. So they were very, very much about sustainability, about, yeah, being kind of, they were marketed as sustainable materials, minimalist design. Their first shoe, the Cool Runner, made from merino wool and sugarcane foam,
Sugarcane, that was
etc.
it. I do remember that.
But
Yeah, yeah. They look really
right,
comfy. They look a bit boring, to be honest, but there you go.
but in actual fact, we are not here to talk shoes because what happened was just this last Thursday, they announced, or so it seems in the press, I think this story is full of smoke and mirrors, but they announced that they were pivoting from shoes to GPUs, which is basically AI
Actually,
driven. It's the hardware. Those are the chips, if you don't know, the graphics processing units that power the AI that we all use, like generative AI, right? So, and there's a global shortage of GPUs, makers of NVIDIA and so on, can't keep up with demand because of the AI boom. And so Allbirds has said it's going to stop selling merino wool shoes and become GPUs as a service, which means you kind of subscribe to them, and anytime you run out of GPUs and you need more power for compute, which has become this like verb stroke noun. I mean, the grammar of it is dodgy, but when you
can
need
I
more
just say
compute power, yes,
that is just nuts? Absolutely nuts. I
right,
mean, I understand a shoe manufacturer maybe going into clothing, but I don't understand a shoe manufacturer going into GPUs. That's like completely unrelated diversification, which is a no-no for anyone except for Richard Branson, really. So, yeah, anyway,
right. Branson
crazy.
can pull off crazy diversification. Nobody else can. So if this were sort of the branding story that, if we were to take the headlines at face value, and the headlines say Allbirds pivots to, GPUs, that would be really nuts. But actually, the story goes deeper. And as it gets deeper, it gets, in my humble opinion, more dastardly. So I'm not accusing anybody of doing anything illegal, but it's just that it sort of goes deeper, right? So actually, what happened is that a couple of months ago, Allbirds actually sold basically all of their assets, including the Allbirds brand name, to another company, American Exchange Group, who have a bunch of brands. So they are going to
Right.
continue to make shoes, right? So they bought the assets, they bought the IP,
And
the
the
name,
name.
and Allbirds shoes. Yeah, so they have all the intellectual property, they can make the shoes, and they have the name. So Allbirds as a shoe brand will actually continue to exist. The new company is going to be called New Bird AI, which, if you'll forgive me a
Ooh.
quick diversion, I think is they missed a trick because actually Allbirds, if you just called it AI birds, you could just drop the
Yeah.
second L and the logo would be practically the same. But they couldn't do
Yeah.
that, cute as that is, because they've given that away to American Exchange Group. So they've had to create a whole new brand,
So
New Bird
going
AI.
back to your question, to your thing, Allbirds has rebranded and is pivoted to GPUs. That's not true then, because they've sold the shoes, they've sold the name, and it's
Yeah,
just a shelf company, right? And
exactly.
that's
And this
not
is the
been
bit where I feel
renamed.
like, right, so it's, I feel like the press around it has been misleading. I mean, of course, it makes for clickbait that, shoe company pivots to AI. is crazy. Now, what really happened that's made it so interesting is that the stock went up like 700% on the announcement, because the market, because it's listed on the NASDAQ, so it's a publicly listed company, and people are much more excited to be in the AI business these days than they are in the shoe business.
Yeah.
So the stock, to be fair, had lost, I don't know, 90 or so percent of its value in the first place. So we're talking about a low base, but it shot up. But actually, it's not that the company entity, yes, has got rid of its shoe business and now is going to kind of sell people GPUs or rent them GPUs. Fine, okay. But really, it's as though the company kind of gave away all its assets and became essentially like a SPAC, which are these special purpose vehicles. One way to list on an exchange is,
on the back of a SPAC.
either you go through all the due diligence. I know you know, Piers, but I'm explaining to anybody who doesn't know what a SPAC is, who's listening, that these special sort of purpose vehicles are. One way to get just on the stock exchange is to jump through all the hoops that the stock exchange asks you to jump through, which is really labor intensive and time intensive. Another way to do it is that there are companies that are SPACs that are just sort of empty vessels, if you like, that have listed and are waiting for somebody to kind of reverse engineer into them. So in some ways, this became a sort of empty shell, and some new mollusk crawled in to this empty shell and has taken up residence within this shell, if you'll forgive my sort of seaside metaphor here. And in a sense, it's really a company, like kind of a shareholder investor structure story, not really a marketing brand story. But it's fascinating.
It's fascinating because what did you say about what was 700% a minute ago? You said something.
The share price soared 700%. 700%. Right. So that raises the question. I mean, the other question that I guess
raises an eyebrow.
Right. It does raise an eyebrow. I mean, I'm not suggesting they've done this, but it does. The comments on Reddit have been absolutely hilarious, and lots of people are calling it a pump and dump. So, as you know, a pump and dump is when somebody inflates the share price, whether by real means or artificial means, and the shareholders all they put out loads of news. Everybody, the share price inflates, then all the existing investors dump the shares. Now, I'm not saying that that's what they've done, but it is pretty hilarious. So. Okay, so some of the comments on Reddit are really funny and just worth a read. Somebody said, designing a shoe is pretty much the same as designing a data center, so that's a solid pivot, which I thought was brilliant and really funny. Somebody else said, back in my day, if you wanted to explode your stock to explode overnight, you just slipped in the word blockchain into your latest earnings report. Somebody else said, the stock market is an absolute joke. Someone else said, this is like when Kodak announced a shift from film to crypto. Somebody called Man Pooper, oh, I'm sorry about that, people, said, this is totally normal. It's not a bubble, sticks head in sand. So, and then a lot of people talking about the timeline. This timeline blows. So it was just really, I mean, there were just so many funny, excuse me, but what the F-bomb? I am pivoting to AI too. Can I have money, please? Was sort of the main gist of it. So I loved all of those. This is the long blockchain corp moment for AI. So somebody, my favorite one, they've sold their soul, S-O-L-E.
Ooh. Very good. Very good.
Well done, person. I actually need to give them a name check because that was so funny. That was far-anywhere-2251. Far Anywhere 2251. Well done. Good pun. Excellent. So the whole thing kind of seems a little bit, I guess, I'm just going to go as far as interesting. Being British, that word, people will know that word damns with faint praise. This is interesting.
Why do you think the media took such a spin on it? Because it's interesting.
It couldn't possibly be clicks. It couldn't possibly be to generate clicks. I mean, I would never suggest that the media would spin a headline in order to create rage bait and make people click on it. That would just be beyond the pale.
I take it got picked up by quite a few media houses, though.
Yeah, everybody. I mean, the FT ran a thing called Flipping the Bird, an article, which really kind of gave us a sense of what they thought of it.
I love journalism sometimes. That's quite good. actually.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very, very good. So yeah, they were really, but it's quite interesting. I mean, the brand itself was really interesting. So it was founded in 2016 by Tim Brown, who was an ex New Zealand footballer, and 𝐻𝐬𝐸 Wiggler, a biotech engineer in Silicon Valley. And their whole thing was to make shoes comfortable using sustainable materials.
Right, which was new at the time, yeah. I mean, that was quite a groundbreaking thing. No one really was doing recyclable shoes. I mean, everyone's got it now, but it wasn't back in 2016. That was pretty fresh.
It was very fresh, and it became the sort of bastion of West Coast liberal, cool tech bros. And they, but I think what you've just described, it was actually the problem, is that everybody else then copied their USP. So they received massive backing from VC firm 𝐻𝐻𝐶𝐶, who's obviously really famous. And yeah, and by 2021, the company was valued at over $1 billion and was listed as an IPO. But the interesting thing in many ways was that I think the kind of sustainability thing and the sort of lightweight comfort of their shoes was something that was replicable. And so Nike and Adidas launched their own shoes made of recycled materials with green messaging, with much larger marketing budget.
Mass market shoe experts as well.
Right. I mean, one doesn't really want to take on Nike and Adidas. I'm not sure that's the market I'd want to go head to head with, brands I'd go head to head with. So the thing is, Allbirds was really expensive. Their trainers were over £100, $100 and something. And so, and once Nike and Adidas kind of replicated the sustainability thing, Nike and Adidas also had all sorts of other pillars, like arrows in their bows in their arrows in their something. What's the metaphor I'm looking for? Arrows in their quiver. Anyway, you get the picture. They had, performance, shoe quality, like, the brands, the coolness of the brands, the marketing budgets, like the retail distribution. Like they had all these other, things in their arsenal.
Didn't Allbirds try and expand their range though? They had one shoe, right?
Right. So they had the Wool Runner, which was incredibly popular, but they just didn't expand. I mean, there was no way they could expand as much as somebody like Nike, or to even match what Nike already had today. So I think it's a sort of salutary lesson in, if you launch with something that is your USP, but you don't expand, and that's not a long-term sustainable thing, it's really difficult. And I think that, people are always looking at kind of what's your moat, what's your defensible USP, and it's very difficult for people to answer that question, because it's, in a sense, in some ways, I feel like everything is copyable. It's very difficult. I mean, of course, you can patent stuff.
It is, but they could have, they owned recyclability through sugarcane, so they could have, as an example, gone beyond the wool shoe to the wool tracksuit bottoms to the wool jacket. They could have expanded that reasonably quickly and then owned sugarcane clothing.
I believe they did expand. They did expand into other things. So they expanded into leggings, and then it turned out the leggings were see-through. So there were some problems. For me, this story this week is much more about Newbird AI and like the craziness of this pivot and this company structured deal, which I found really fascinating. And I just think I felt like, we needed to just kind of get underneath the skin of this story, that somehow this 700% increase in shares was due to a brand pivot. It really isn't. And it's been really fascinating to read the story. So let's see what happens next. We will be watching with interest. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
Marketing Global Edition is sponsored by 𝐓𝐢𝐸𝐸, the ad generator for small businesses that serves you effective and affordable ads in seconds. And by 7 Brands, the international advertising and branding agency that has worked with clients around the world, from Coca-Cola to Facebook.